Greetings to everybody. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'll be your host and chief cat herder for the next hour. We are going to be spending this time in the Shindig environment, and I'll explain that in just a second. But welcome everyone. I'm very glad you're here. So just to let you know, the Future Trends Forum is an offshoot of my Future Trends in Technology and Education project. This is the ongoing monthly trends analysis and environmental scan, looking for current developments that suggest something of the future of education and technology. It's a free report, although we're always happy for donations. So if you haven't seen it before, go to ftte.us, check out some sample reports, and sign up. This weekly event is instead an interactive session where we discuss issues. We take a deep dive into one particular with an expert or a guru and learn a lot about it. This is a very interactive session too. I'll explain how in a second. Now, we can only do this with help from two different agencies. So we, above all, AdvisorNet from New York State, who do terrific work, and they very generously supported FTTE, and we thank them for that support. And also, more evidently, is Shindig, who supports us in two different ways. One is they have a team of brilliant people who are extremely helpful. Connie, if you're having a problem with sound, why don't you go mouse over your icon, check settings, and make sure that your sound is coming in. Also, if that doesn't work, on the very, very right-hand corner of the screen is a little orange dot that says raise. Click that to summon help from the Shindig team. As an example of what I'm talking about. Now, you're in the Shindig environment. So if you're new to it, I just saw Alan a few minutes ago, so let me explain how this works. The screen is divided into two levels. On the very top, where I am, is the stage. This is where presenters are. And the bottom half is where all the participants are. And you can see right now, you're in a room with maybe a dozen or 18 other people. Now, the presenters up top is usually me and another person, or it can be me and a little PowerPoint slide. I'll get rid of that in a minute. Or it can be you and the guest for this week. So if you'd like to participate, if you'd like to contribute questions, comments, and thoughts, we have a few different ways of doing that. And one is you can click on two dots in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So if you haven't seen these yet, one of them says raise, and has a picture of a hand. If you click that, that tells us that you would like to come up on stage. So if your mic is working and your video is working, then we can hear you, and you can come up on stage and talk to myself or to our guest. Now, if you're shy, or if your technology isn't working, or if you would rather write, click the other orange button that says ask. And when you click that, that sends us your question, and then we can show that question to everybody else or read it out loud. Now, there's two other ways to participate. I mentioned the chat box. If you haven't used that before, mouse over your icon. You'll see a box that says I am chat. Click that, and you'll get a chat box for the room you're in. So you can chat to everybody there, or you can chat just to one particular person. And beyond that, if you're a Twitter hound, we have a Twitter discussion going on. So just tweet at me, Brian Alexander, or tweet using the hashtag FTTE. And we try and address those during the discussion, and we'll address them afterwards as well. So there are a lot of ways to participate. This is an unusual video conference. We really believe in this being as interactive as possible. Now, speaking of interacting, let me talk to you about our guest. I'm really, really excited to have Brad Buehler here. Some of you probably know Brad. Some of you worked with him. Brad is one of the leading chief information officers in academia worldwide. He's the CIO and VP at Indiana University, where he's been leading many, many efforts, many projects. The man is a renowned expert in the field. He's also the leader, most recently, of a collaborative project called Unism, which we'll talk about today. So again, I want you to think about this perspective. What does it mean to be the chief information officer of a campus, of a college or university? What does it mean to have those resources and those constraints? And we'll do it right now. Shindig folks, if you could pull down that PowerPoint and put Brad up on stage. Greetings, Brad.
Hello. Hi.
Glad to see you. Just for your benefit, by the way, I wore a red tie today. I hope that's symbolic.
I appreciate that.
Good, good, good. Welcome. I'm so glad you had the time to be here, Brad. We really appreciate it. Um, and I also appreciate you struggling with any of the technological hurdles that we put in your way. So I'm very glad you could be here.
You know,
Well,
when a
let's
CIO can
dive in.
actually
I'd like
get his
to ask.
headset to work, it's a good thing.
Well, a lot of this technology is stuff that we still have to work on. Let me ask to begin with. We focus here on the future of education technology, and we often look at the next 5 years to see how things are going. Let me ask first, where do you see the role of the CIO changing? Do you see any new responsibilities, any new political configurations, any new institutional changes? What do you think? Next 5 years.
Well, I think so much of it depends on organizational history and context and the individual. I think Marianne Broadbent had it right. She wrote in 2001 in the opening pages of her book, I forgot it was called The New CIO or the CIO or something like that, that the CIO either every day is becoming a business leader in whatever the business of that organization is, or becoming a plumber, because the IT infrastructure is very critical and you're going to need plumbing, and so no one should ever dismiss the value of it. We enjoy it every day in our home. But if you're not deeply engaged in the heart and soul and the life of what the business is, and for us, that is education, or in some cases, research and education, then little by little, the role drifts away and you become plumber in chief. And then what you see in the trend that we've observed in recent years is you see there's a gap at that institution. So new titles are imagined. Chief Digital Officer, the Vice Provost of Digital Stuff. I mean, there's a whole range of titles that come in, but it's quite often because for whatever reasons, historical, organizational, individual, the CIO and his or her organization has not been able to be effective in IT in the heart and soul of the business itself. And if I'd add one more coda on to that explanation, um, universities are peculiar places, and if I speak to research universities in particular, and sometimes there's a bit of a kind of an electric fence of saying, oh, wait, that's the faculty's role. The staff, you stay on this side of the line, and that's the faculty side of the line. And I'm a professor, so I teach, I understand where that comes from, but I think in many times that leaves a vacuum. If IT professionals, if librarians, if people who are skilled in digital content, who are skilled in pedagogical techniques, are not enabled to engage deeply in the heart and soul of the mission as it's being digitally evolved or transformed, we find a vacuum, and it will be filled one way or another.
And that's on the research university level.
Well, for the research university level, but I think on the education side, digital to support education is at all levels. Community colleges, obviously distributed learning programs, mid-sized schools, etc. For the research university, I could add the whole soliloquy of cyber infrastructure and high performance computing and big massive storage systems, etc. Absent some coherent plan and strategy, you find that the institution turns into haves and have-nots. That the engineering school has access to really good high performance computing, but for some reason the chemistry department doesn't really have access to it, though they need to do digital modeling. And we've always been of the mindset at IU, by metaphor, if you want more paintings, don't ration the canvas. So we want to try to provide cyber infrastructure on the research side, or the tools for education on the teaching and learning, the digital tools, in as much of an infrastructure, broadly provisioned to everybody way as possible. The teaching assistant, the full endowed chair professor on the Bloomington campus, the part-time instructor who may only teach in evenings on one of our regional campuses, or faculty there. We want it to be common infrastructure and the best that we can provision to be available for everyone for the mission.
And you can only do that if you're both a successful business leader and plumber.
Well, if you don't have the plumbing right, you don't get the opportunity to be the business leader, because if the network keeps going offline or email is out for a week, no one really wants to talk to you about strategy. So the first is absolutely a requisite to being able to have a conversation about the second.
Do you find, thinking ahead of it, as you said, depending on the institutional context, institutional history, and the individual CIO, do you think perhaps we'll see two different types of campuses moving forward? One might be one where you have a unified strategy across a campus, and the other is where there is disunified strategy and lots of unevenness, as you said, haves and have-nots. I mean, will those maybe be the two modes for higher education CIOs?
Well, I think they already are the modes that we see in many places. A lot of innovation comes from the faculty. When I say faculty in this context, I mean everyone who has a teaching responsibility, teaching assistants, lecturers, adjuncts. I'm going to say faculty, but I mean that in the inclusive sense of those who deliver on the educational mission. And so in the absence of an institution provisioning the tools that they need, they will find them. And they may go to this cloud service or that one, or they may stand up something in a department or a school, and it's very material, and it enables the role that they have. It enables success in interacting with their students, and in many cases, some really pretty damn clever innovation comes out of those kinds of local contexts. But then if you think about the student perspective as a customer, I mean, imagine if you were going to the airport and every time you wanted to fly, it was a completely different process at the airport. I don't mean the variance between Delta and American. I mean, you had to walk backwards down one tarmac, and you had to walk down to the ground of another one, and some you loaded your luggage first and some you didn't. And, I mean, if you could just imagine chaos around it. In the end, you got on an airplane every time. But there was really no familiarity
Consider
to
that
it.
the Philadelphia airport.
It very well could be. But the point I want to make is when we celebrate the uniqueness of individual faculty doing things in their class, and then we think about a student taking 5 courses. And so for her, she often doesn't find great value in 5 different ways just to turn in a darn homework assignment, or 5 different ways just to go find out what her grades are, or what's on the calendar for next Tuesday. So there's a degree of shared service that is really valuable that should be provisioned at some scale. That doesn't mean the techniques you teach languages with would be the same techniques that you would teach chemistry with. But we shouldn't confuse innovation where it's pedagogically valuable versus just common infrastructure where we can simplify it, because by and large it's doing the same thing and makes a learner's experience easier.
You, in an email to me, you referred to another metaphor of the fly swatter metaphor. Can you unfold on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, it's funny, on national CIO list or conversations, the cloud is upon us. And, being a business school guy and a professor of information technology, there's this 20-year arc of insourcing and doing things on premises in a variety of ways. And then it swings back to outsourcing and doing things somewhere else. So clearly, because of the majesty of the network right now and the economies of scale in aggregating IT services, we're very much in an outsource swing very much an infrastructure swing provisioned in the cloud. So what we have right now on the campus is, Brian notes, I joked with him just a little bit, is what I call the fly swatter strategy of IT. That there's some nagging little problem in admissions, and lo and behold, a whippersnapper young company comes along and they got a gadget, they've got a thingy. And if you just license this thingy and it doesn't seem very much, a department finds it only costs $2,500 a year or $13,000 a year, and so they do it. And then another department does a different one, or all of a sudden something else comes along. And so it's kind of see problem as a fly, SWAT, cloud solution, and then off we go. And then when someone says, oh, but wait, how are they handling our FERPA protected data? Or this company fell over and they do have our data, and now we no longer have a business agreement with them. They're in insolvency, or they got bought up by someone that we're not very happy about in some way. And so the note I sent to the National EDUCAUSE CIO list on the fly swatter strategy, if I can make one more point, we're often in the present day, we're complaining about those idiot decisions the guy ahead of us made. How in the world could he have locked us in to this high cost strategy with this ERP, or this high cost strategy for something else? No one ever intentionally makes a set of decisions that will lead to a problem later. So we're in that moment right now, and I sent this to the EDUCAUSE listserv of accumulating a lot of what could be the dead flies. That we use a lot of different fly swatters, we swatted them, and then 5 years hence, we have a completely unmanageable mishmash of different services in some way. And I want to be sure and again put a footnote on that. I'm a cloud proponent. We use cloud services a lot here at Indiana University, but we try to have a very deliberate sourcing strategy of what we're going to do inside the university for a particular reason, what we'll do with partners, and what we're going to go out to the commercial world and just source in open cloud services.
Well, I'm sorry I vanished and fell off the stage. I think we had Vermont is having a very warm July, and I think this may have made the infrastructure dizzy with delight. Thank you for your sustained answer. I think the fly swatter metaphor is a brilliant one. It really describes a lot of what we're seeing. Before I go further, Shindig folks, can you bring up that question? We had a question from Connie, and I wanted to bring that up if I could. Connie asks this: do you see the implementation of more knowledge management practices being introduced into processes in academia to reduce chaos?
Boy, I'll be real candid, Connie. Thank you for the question. I really don't. And I say that as a student of knowledge management when there was really a deep, serious effort around it in the corporate context through the 1990s, and some really good work being done. So I don't see a purposeful knowledge management approach or practice pervading within an institution, or more importantly, between institutions. What I do see is much more intentional scaffolding of information flows and rapid learning within an institution, and sometimes between institutions. That's one of the key things we're trying to do with Unison, is the 11 institutions that are in it right now, we're trying to learn quickly about digital education together rather than individually, institution by institution. So in terms of formal knowledge management, I think we're greasing some of the pathways. I don't see management in the sense of managing it the way you would other parts of the enterprise.
That's a great question, and a very, very powerful answer. That matches on to what I'm seeing as well, Brad, that this is KM is one field from the corporate world that just hasn't really caught on in academia. Well, you mentioned Unison, and I said that we could talk about it. Why don't you take a minute and tell us what Unison is up to in mid 2016? How are things going? What are you doing?
Well, Unison is 2 official years into existence. It probably took a year to get the band together before we officially became public with the Hawaii Unison essay of June of 14. Uh, the staff, they're located in Austin, Texas. It's where the operation is headquartered. Amin Kazi was hired as the CEO. I think he's got I can't remember, about 18 staff right now at headquarters. So that buildup has gone quite well. Some of you know last year Unison really has 3 pieces to it, and that is around content capabilities, whether that's discovering and finding things in OER, whether it's licensed content from publishers, it's enabling faculty authored content, content that we already have licensed, it's in our libraries. And we want to make it
Mhm.
easier for faculty to get access to and students not to have to pay for a second time. So there's a lot of work going on around content. And about, 9 months ago, we made known that we had acquired the software assets of a company called CourseLoad. And they have an e-reader annotation piece of software and a really robust content capability on the backside. So the Unison staff have continued to refine that. And what that means right now is the faculty can author things, whether it's assemble and edit a course pack, or they author it themselves. We can pump it through to student access on about any device, including offline access here in about 2 more months. Students can annotate, they can have study groups on it, they can work with it. And then all the analytics of students touching and interacting with that flow off of it back into the Unison platform. So Unison really has 3 pieces. I've spoken about the content capability. There's the interaction piece, and I think most of you know we've gone with Canvas. Instructure Canvas is our partner for the core of the traditional LMS. But we've got a lot of things that we're hanging around the sides of that. And then the third piece is the analytics, and that is capturing kind of the digital dust of interactions. And we've got faculty who are studying it. Do students in A/B testing acquire skills faster with different sequences of presenting material? So one of the things about the content piece that I spoke to with Unison Engage is I think it's pretty exciting that we can go from faculty authored content delivered through a platform owned by the Academy, and then all the digital tracks coming off of it into repositories owned by the Academy that are available for IRB approved research, Institutional Review Board approved research. And we don't have to ask for our data back. It's our data. It's our students' data. You know,
Uh,
and I think that that's a really important thing for the future. So what we're standing up right now, Unison, if I can give a longish answer here, and Ryan, I apologize, but there's just so many things going on with Unison right now. Absent Unison, what we foresaw is we're going to have faculty and instructors who want to learn how to improve their instruction. And digital data is going to be very important to learn how to do that. So IU would have to stand up an infrastructure, a data warehouse, policies around it, how we tag that data, how we make it discoverable, and manage the security around it. And then Oregon State would have to do that. And then the University of Florida would have to do that, et cetera. And that's kind of crazy. And you'd be sure if there were 13 of us doing it, we'd do it in 27 different ways. So why not do it together as a shared service? So right now, Unison has already turned on the institutional part of the data warehouse. So IU has a data warehouse hosted and managed by Unison that our Canvas real-time data is flowing into, or will be. I think we're about 2 signatures away, but will be by the end of the month. And likewise, the University of Iowa has one, and Ohio State. And by the end of the calendar year, we anticipate being at a place that if our institutions wish to give permission, that there's going to be a study about STEM education, and a researcher at Michigan and a researcher at IU who both teach in early STEM fields, they want to do some coordinated research, that they would be able to do that with a cross-institutional data set. So we're hoping to really enable the means of improving digital education through the institution being able to assert a much greater degree of control around content, learner interaction platforms, and analytics. And of course, we're building this to the greatest degree that we can around IMS global standards with Caliper on the analytics side. A lot of content from the standards from the librarians and others are already there on the content side. So that was a big mouthful. I can say a lot more, but that's where we're heads down right now. We're just punching it out against the roadmap.
That sounds fantastic, and that's very rich, and also gives me a lot of questions. But before I get to ask a question, we have a question from a member of the Future Transform community, and this is Kisa. Kisa Johnson wants to ask, so if the Shindig folks can take me off and put Kisa up, let her talk to you, Brett.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for sharing because it's pretty interesting. I have a question. So, are there any like artifacts or things of learning that are tangible at this point from all the collaboration from the different institutions? And also, is it still like, do you think it's still a black box right now from the things that you're producing? Like it's kind of like siloed a little bit more because of the different institutions and they're still trying to produce. Like, I didn't really hear any like, what are the actual products? What we'll be looking at? How we'll be seeing it? Like, what does it feel like? What does it look like? How, how does it move
Yep.
products from your project?
Yeah, I can speak to a few things, and I'll say we're trying to go from black box to Technicolor, Omnicolor, of having a lot going on there. Unison, if you read the why Unison, the initial blog post, we made reference, or at least I think it made it into the final cut of that, about getting higher ed more onto common gauge rails. If you're traveling across Europe, you know that you can get on a train in Croatia, and it can roll all the
Mm-hmm.
way up to Brussels, and it crosses the German tracks and Slovenia and across Austria, and because they're on common gauge rails, you have different train companies offering first class, a tourist coach, a Eurail pass. They're doing a whole bunch of different things, but they're running on common gauge rails. So we've been spending
Okay.
the first year getting more on common gauge rails, and that to first order is around Instructure Canvas. That is a common LMS. We can get common data feeds coming out of it, data dictionaries applied in common ways about, what is a course, what is a student, what is an instructor. So we've done a lot of work there. Likewise, on the content side, we've already turned that on to all of our institutions. IU, we moved pretty early in e-text programs and started in 2009 and really mainstreamed it in 2011. And we were using the course load platform back in the day, and now that is the Unison Engage platform. And I think we've already got, I need to
Okay.
pull up a number here. I think we're at 34, 35,000 students who already have one digital
Okay.
text going. So Ohio State is now piloting that and rolling it out. Iowa is piloting that. And then I guess one more piece, and it's kind of a longish answer. Forgive me in giving this to you, but this touches back on the knowledge management piece. What you see is our directors for the centers of teaching and learning on each of these campuses, and our librarians and our CIOs and some of our instructional designers, they're all sharing materials like crazy. So when Iowa went into its Canvas rollout, or Ohio State went into its rollout of e-text, they're not having to invent the wheel or the training for it, or how would you market it, how would you answer faculty questions. All that stuff is just being, shared in a pretty frictionless way in the community.
Oh, one more thing. I got one more question, and tell me if you answered it. I'm sorry. My apologies if you did. So, what made these universities want to kind of collaborate on this project? What was the main driver for them?
Well, in each case, the provost is the one who eventually signed off and said, yes, we're going to do this. I think the champion to become a member and a founder and an investor, in some cases, it came through the CIO making the case for learning technologies. A lot of this is going to go to scale. This data is going to go to scale. We either will be trying to figure this out by ourselves, or we will become most likely beholden to someone else who makes scale, whether that's the publishers or some of the other companies. So why don't we go in and do this together? In some cases, librarians played champion roles. In some cases, it was, the vice provost of education, vice provost of something. So the path differed for each of the 11. The first 3 of us really out of the gate were Michigan, Indiana, and the University of Florida. And our provost very quickly got into alignment that we should do this thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Like I said, Brad, the Future Transform people have great questions, and I don't get to ask any of them, which is ideal. And now you and I get to climb off stage because this is the time on the forum when we mingle. So if you haven't been here before, friends, what happens is Brad and I will join you in the audience, and we take about 5 minutes to discuss a question. And the question I want to ask, based on Brad's discussion of Unison and what they're doing, is where are you seeing these kind of interinstitutional collaborations happening at your institution? If you're at a college, a university, a library, a museum, where are you seeing these kinds of collaborations happening? Are they local, perhaps, regional, say within your city or state, or are they happening at a national or international level? Or if they're not happening, if you're in isolation, that's also an answer. So let's take 5 minutes and see where these kind of other forms of shared services are happening. And we'll rejoin here in 5 minutes. So let's dig in. Oh, one quick caveat. If you don't feel like talking out loud like I'm doing now, if your mic doesn't work, your video doesn't work, you're shy, or you're in a public setting, that's okay. Just mouse over your icon. You'll see a little kind of lock icon. Click that. That'll make sure no one can just stumble into you and start yapping. So if you prefer to do that, set that setting, I understand. Otherwise, let's take some time and chat. We'll be back in 5. Shindig, folks, behold the mingle. Well, welcome back, everyone. As I just said on Twitter, one of the things I love about these Future Transform events is the ability to get out of the way as host and let you all drive, to let you ask the questions, to let you be the ones making the content and the conversation. So I'm very, very glad to have done that. We just had a great conversation with a couple of folks who are talking about being Unison members and about how they were progressing, that the LMS transition was a big deal. When we get Brad on here, we can have him, I think this is him now. Brad, what did you get to talk about?
We were talking, I blessedly was reminded by some of our participants that I've been talking about universities and had made no reference to K through 12. And we have a number of folks today in the K through 12 context, and we were discussing if some of the things that Unison's doing would be extensible to the K through 12 context. So that's where we were at.
And do you think they are?
Well, I do. As I shared with the group I was in, I think the app metaphor was the creation of Internet 2. For folks who know about Internet 2, it's our national network, and you have to, I think it's important to think back when it was created in the late 90s. That some of us are old enough to know that that was the go-go internet era, and WorldCom and MCI and AT&T and all these companies, Sprint, were just killing it out there, and the internet was becoming a thing, and you wanted it at home, and all. And then here comes these crazy academics that say, nope, we're going to build our own network. We don't want to go to the commercial sector and just contract for one. And in a way, that sounded kind of crazy at the time. But the point was, we wanted to be able to shape our own network use. If the physicists wanted to download ginormous data and melt the network, we didn't want someone saying we couldn't do that kind of research or limiting policy. So Internet 2 was founded by 34 universities, all research-intensive universities. It was not federally funded. We put our own capital in it. We built the darn thing. And now it's got well over 250 members. And behind those members, like you were referring to your network there in Vermont, here in Indiana, there is the iLight network, or in Ohio, there's ORNet. And behind ORNet, you may have tons of school districts and other institutions of all sizes. So if that metaphor holds, then what we can do is we're trying to build Unison right now. We got 11 cooks in the kitchen. We're figuring out a lot of things. We're processing a lot of institutional change, but everything we're building is to be extensible as these things mature with other models down the road.
Well, that's a good answer. That's a good answer. You're building now to be extensible later. I have more questions, but so does everybody else. And let me start off with one from Abram Anders. He asks, how is Unison looking to balance a content infrastructure with support for diverse activities? That is, are there add-ons in development for Canvas?
Yeah, the first thing is we do try to be fairly zen at Unison, but it is Z-I-N. And if you're a wine drinker, you can remember the difference. I think that lots of creativity happens on common infrastructure. Look at the heterogeneity of the many services that have evolved on top of the web. In terms of HTTP being able to sling out web pages, in terms of HTML, what it can do, in terms of how browsers work and get updated. And like I just put in new Ghostery the other day because I'm just getting darn tired of being tracked for everything that I do. And Ghostery is available, and it just plugs into Chrome or Firefox or a few things. So we see that you can have independent modules of innovation, but they actually do best when they can connect to more common bases of infrastructure. If I had to completely run Ghostery as a whole separate thing and change everything about what I do, it'd be dead on arrival. It wouldn't. I wouldn't go through the trouble to use it, and that's what we often see. My first administrative job was Associate Dean for Teaching and Learning IT, and I struggle with. So we have some cool stuff here called WebWork that was used for math instruction. Came out of Rochester, but it wasn't diffusing very well. Others weren't picking it up because it didn't connect well with Blackboard, or it didn't connect well with this or that or something else. So in the absence of common infrastructure, innovation struggles to grow and scale and build on top of it. So Unison, we're trying to do as much as we can on common infrastructure and then add to it where needed. Canvas already has a very robust add-on environment around it, some commercial, some open source, some local stuff. So we're tapping into some of that. Unison is not trying to be a tool builder like we were with Sakai or many of the other efforts out there where we really built all the software ourselves. We are more of an integrator, some of it commercial, some of it we want to build ourselves because we think it's important to own. Like the Engage platform, it was important for us to own a means of getting content all the way to the student and owning the data that came off of the student interaction so that it could be governed then by the university's policies around privacy for data.
That's a terrific answer. I like that slogan, you're not a tool builder. So this is different from a decade past, the days of Sakai, for example, and Stone Soup. You're talking about being an integrator instead. And that's a lot more extensible. Before I go on, there's another question. David Raths has a great question. He says, do you anticipate or want any more members by now? Or is there value in keeping the size as it is?
Yeah, Unison is open to additional members as investors. We're not closed in any way. We're not trying to grow right now in terms of putting a big push on and trying to get bigger. We have the resources we need to be able to build a lot of the things that we're doing, but I do think we're at a great point for an institution that wasn't quite having a risk profile of saying, yeah, let's just jump in there with those crazy, Buckeyes and, Michigan folks and Colorado State. And said, we want to wait and see if there's something there before we come in. The water's warm. The water's good now because of the number of real things that we have coming out of the staff at Unison, the contracts, the implementation, and such. So if another institution really aligned its values about what we're trying to achieve, we are taking additional institutions right now. I think at some point we will be ready to grow aggressively. And you'll hear us out really asserting and talking a lot about growing. Right now, by being an investor and being a member, you get to exert a lot of organizational or institutional control in how these things shape out. If it had been 2 or 3 of us together, we probably would have built something really weird that didn't generalize well. But by the time you've got 11 kinds of different institutions around the table, you get a lot of really strong input and ideas and testing to start to build a much more extensible, generalized case of integrated infrastructure.
Well, it sounds like, I want to say, you heard it first, folks, on the Future Trends Forum, that Unison is getting ready to, you can get in on the ground floor now, but it'll be expanding aggressively once all the tracks are done. Just a quick question, Brett, for myself. Are Unison investors mandated to purchase everything that you arrange joint licenses for?
Oh, you know how institutions love to be told what to do.
Yeah,
no.
It's a favorite thing, like dentistry.
Yeah, so this is really a key point is we want to enable shared infrastructure, and then organizations are going to digest it at the pace that suits them. And they may have, their business school may jump out very aggressively and consuming lots of things that happen because business schools are incredibly competitive with each other, particularly in their graduate and professional degree programs. And other parts of the campus may say, oh, we have no interest in digital text and e-text and licensing stuff, go away, it's just not our thing. And so, okay. The one thing we are all aligned around Canvas. We're not going to try to deal with the rabid heterogeneity that comes from a bunch of different learning management systems. And let me be the first to give homage to all of them. Clearly, they succeed. I could rattle through the roster of LMSs, and we could all agree that there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of, maybe thousands of institutions that succeed in using each one of them. So in a way, it proves the point, they're not differentiators. In many ways, they're not a differentiator. We trade faculty like the major league trades baseball and football players. Our students move from one institution to another. And in every case, somebody can pick up the LMS, whatever it is. If they move to a Blackboard school or they move to a D2L school or somewhere else. So they're not a differentiator. And we think if I want to teach an interinstitutional degree someday, maybe I want to say, hey, there's a a fantastic person, you know, at the University of Florida or at Nebraska. And I want to, because I have, as a faculty member, I have done this. I have taught interinstitutionally, where I taught a part of the course and somebody who is a great expert in another thing, they taught a part of the course. We'd like to make that easy. So Unison won't cause any of that to happen, but we're going to get rid of the barriers if faculty wish to do things like that in the future.
And speaking of that, Vanessa Vale has a good question. She asks, what about faculty input among member institutions? So I think that's both on campus, but also across campuses.
Absolutely right. We have a number of work groups, task forces that have commissioned work around how we would manage content, what we would do with learning analytics, what standards would be made available. So there's a broad set of work groups that span institutions. And back to the knowledge management question, that starts to scaffold together us learning together. So Michigan is ahead of us at NIU. I can name a few areas, Tim McKay up there and his work on STEM research and success. And IU is aligning around some of what's happening there. Our friends at Iowa, they're ahead of us on some other things. I think there's a few things where Indiana faculty are doing some pretty darn clever stuff. And so there are levels of, like, the CIO, the board level of integration. There's a work group for librarians, for folks around data analytics, and then there's some centers for teaching and learning for sure. And then there are some faculty work groups as well. And I note here in the chat forum, I'll just pick up one if I may. I see Joe Murphy has asked a question of, there's a constant tension in consortia. What's good for me versus what's good for us. Lots of experience of that in Ohio Link. Yeah, it's amazing universities ourselves hold together and don't combust. And you know, the tension between engineering and business and the arts and et cetera. And I'd like to say one of our co-founders, and Brian credited me with leading Unison, but there's really been many of us involved, many, and I've got to be absolutely clear about that. But James Hilton, who was the CIO at Michigan, then at Virginia, and is now Dean of Libraries at Michigan, you know, he and I have the battle scars of having gone through many consortia, whether it was Internet 2, uPortal work starting up in the earlier days, DuraSpace, Sakai, various Koali projects. You know, I can go on and on and on. And so we've tried to aggregate what we learned in each of those in balancing that tension. How do you make it work? It's got to be awesome for the institution back home, or the resources and engagement dries up. And it's got to be more than the institution could do by itself to keep the institution making some compromises a little bit when it's not exactly the way we would have done it at IU, but we're all in. It's better for us because there's these other things going on. We wrote a piece in EDUCAUSE Review about 4 years ago called The Marketecture of Community. And what we mean is there's a marketplace of ideas of things that ought to happen, but there's a certain architecture of organizations that cause them to succeed interinstitutionally or to fall over. And so we've tried to consolidate the best of lessons across the whole of this. I failed to mention HathiTrust, which I think Internet 2 and HathiTrust have been two of the best multi-institutional collaborations. Moodle obviously has been a great worldwide collaboration as well. And so I think we're kind of coming out of our adolescent years of learning how to make collaborations come together that actually work, rather than those that fall over. And I'll just say one more point on this, because I care passionately about building institutions that can last. I think some of the things that we've failed, the reason some of our institutions or our organizations have struggled in the past is we had an aspiration, you know, that was up here, and we contributed a resource base that was often down here. And then nature took its course over time. And so, you know, you struggle when you see such voluminous resources going off to the left while people are saying what they really want is on the right. There was a great piece Stephen Kerr published, I think, in 1973 called On the Folly of Rewarding A While Hoping for B. And that's what we find ourselves often in with higher ed, where we want the scale of collaboration, but we don't quite know how to glue it together.
Speaking of gluing it together, I have everything apart. We're right at the edge of the hour. It's just 3 o'clock here in Eastern Time. We have more great questions from folks. People have a lot of interest. The Twitter space has just been burning up. I have to draw a formal end to our recording in our session. I want to respect everyone's time. Brad, if you want to stick around for a couple of minutes and chat more informally, it's totally up to you. I understand your schedule is crazy. But if you can't, I understand. But if you can, that would be fun.
I'll stay on for a couple of minutes and answer questions. If one thing I might say is the old African proverb that we've all heard: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And if you see the little statue behind me there, that weighs, I think, about 100 pounds. It's a carved piece of rock that I brought back from Africa called the Family. And there are 4 heads carved into that stone. And so I hope as a family, with some of this, we can go together.
Well, I'm glad that we're able to go together for this hour, and I think in the future we can go together further still. If people want to keep up with Unison, what's the best way? The Unison website or the Unison Twitter feed or something else?
Yeah, the Unison website. There is also a very active Unison Twitter feed. Like all websites, this one's about to be very substantially upgraded. I think it's the end of the month. We're going to come out of our teenage website and try to move to a little bit more of an adult one. It's a normal thing that happens over time. But I think what you can expect in the next 12 months is a number of it took a while to get the band together, and you're going to start really hearing the music over the next 12 months as these services roll out about every 2 months.
Well, Brad, I hope that in about 12 months, maybe we can get you back on so you can update us about the progress of this family. Thank you so much.
Happy to do so, or tune in to any of the other folks who are co-leading it. So bye-bye. Thank you all very much. It's been an enjoyable hour interacting with you.
A real pleasure. Real pleasure. Thank you. Now, before everyone goes, let me just let you know that next week we have another fantastic guest, and I really commend him to your attention. He's a librarian and a faculty member and a leading digital humanist. It's Dan Cohen. He's the director of DP.LA, the Digital Public Library of America, a very unique, very ambitious project. He's going to talk to us about what's going on with that and with digital humanities. So please stay tuned for exactly 7 days from now. Let me thank everybody for all of your questions and all of your comments. This has been a really rich conversation. And I think we've had some very special, almost unique discussion from Brad. Now, if we could pause the recording for now, stop the recording for now, I'll stick around here for a few minutes if you'd like to talk. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming.